This is grant writing. I'm Maeghan, Kearney at the Alaska State Library. So again, if you have any questions, just sing out, or you can hold them on to the end and we will discuss it then. The webinar is going to be going until about 1:15, so we'll have you there. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what we're going to talk about in this grant. Here's a list of what we're going to be covering, and this is pretty much the order we're going to go in. The pre-writing, finding funders, creating the actual grant, that's going to be the bulk of this presentation, and then we're going to talk about submitting the proposal, the follow-ups, and then some more resources at the end. And again, I'd like to point out on this first page, there's a little link at the bottom, lam.alaska.gov/grants. That's where we've listed all of the grant resources that we've found for you guys. And that's not just what's in this presentation. We found some additional ones that would be of use to anyone. It also has like writing resources and some other places to find grant information. And that's the general federal and state and nonprofit grants, and then also things for just libraries. Okay, so before you start writing, as you see here, start with your idea. One thing to make sure you have ahead of time is to make sure that your library has all of its ducks in a row, all of your IRS documentation. Make sure that the thing you want to do your grant for is actually a pressing problem, but not something that's so pressing that it needs to be done immediately. The process of writing a grant, submitting it, and then having the funder respond back to you can take something like up to 9 or 12 months occasionally, or a little short, a little longer, but this isn't for things that have to happen within the next few months. You just aren't going to have the time for it. Another thing to discuss, even just on your idea, is what exactly the idea is, whether or not it's relevant to your mission, and also you need to consider not shooting too high as it is. It's better to make a grant for a small project that you can accomplish than to aim for something really impressive and really large that your library doesn't have the staff or the training to handle. So if you do your smaller projects, you can work your way up to something larger. And then you can also use your smaller projects to validate basically why you would be best to get larger money later on down the line. So basically using the smaller projects as the base to form all of the, shoot, there's a word here that I'm not coming up with. Basically, they use a smaller project so that you can handle the larger products later down the road. So again, you want to make sure that you show that you can handle this type of grant. Making sure that you also have enough time for it, that everyone in your library is on board, that you're all going to be okay with whatever the project is and the amount of effort and time away from your current jobs that you're going to take. The after effects of the grant, sometimes people don't think about it, but if you have some sort of grant to get extra, like another program of some type, and it's going to draw more patrons in, are you going to be able to handle the extra attention, the extra services you're going to have to provide? We recently at the State Library, this isn't exactly a grant, but we ran a big survey out to all the other state workers in the state as one part promotional and another part to see if anyone was using our services. And we had, I think, 7% of all state employees respond, which seems like a small number. And then of that percent, 1 or 2% signed up for additional services, but for 3 weeks, we were completely jam-packed with fulfilling all of the requests, where every single person here stopped their regular work and was just handling requests and emails and phone calls from other state agencies. So make sure you can handle whatever the after effects are of the programs and projects that you're applying for grant funding for. And also, you don't want to put too many projects together into one grant in hopes that it makes your grant sound more impressive. If you stick together a bunch of little projects in one grant, you're basically going to be diluting what you're requesting. So you're either going to be watering down the proposal, or you're going to put yourself in a place to do too many projects at once, because you have to do the projects that you're getting the grant funding for. Okay, so next up we have research. So something that's really useful to do, the top part is research similar projects, and what you can do is actually contact other libraries or other nonprofit organizations that have had a similar project that you're looking at. You can find a wealth of other information. They can tell you if they're open to it, like who they submitted to or what process they used to write their grant or where they got their information for. So a lot of your time is actually going to be spent just doing the research and getting all of your information together. I know Patience Fredrickson up in Anchorage, what she recommends doing is making basically a project packet, which is all of this information together and then compiling it for various funders, but pulling bits of information out depending on what information the funder wants. An interesting thing here also is I have statistics down here under usage statistics for your organization. This is something to start considering before you're looking at the funding. You want to make sure that you actually are compiling your statistics, that you have usage statistics. Sometimes we aren't counting things that are important. So it's good to make sure you have a nice backlog of all the information about your library and find out where your mission statement is, or finalize it if it's still in draft form, as is occasional. We also have, let's go next is, here is another place to find community information. This is on the Department of Commerce's website. This is where you're going to find your community demographics. And here I pulled up ADAC. So you'll find the history of ADAC and all of the other information that might be requested in a grant to add a bit of flavor to it, so that the fundee can get a feel for your community. You want to put your personality forward so they know who it is that they're actually funding. And speaking of that, researching your funder. Each funder is going to have different guidelines. They're going to have different mission statements, different personalities, basically. You want to know everything you can about the place you're trying to get money from. I have here about restrictions to how the funds are used. You want to make sure that the grant you're applying for is something that you're actually going to be able to use for the project in the way that you think you're going to. Some of them are going to put restrictions on how you use the money. You want to make sure that you can actually find out what those parameters are and whether or not they're acceptable to you. There's another thing about, I have at the bottom, is their mission statement in line with yours? There are many different grant organizations out there, or places that give out grants. Not all of them are going to be in line with your own mission statement. What you want to make sure when you're doing a grant is that you're not going to be, how do you say, what did it say? Right, sorry. there was a phrase someone used, and I couldn't quite remember what it was. Someone said that it's creating more branches on the tree, basically. So you have your organization, and as you do all these grants, like if you're getting the money, it could actually be pushing your organization, your library, in a different direction than you thought you were going to be going into. And you want to make sure that the money that you're getting for the grant, for the project, is going to still be in line with what you yourself deem your library is important to do. So if you're just looking to get extra money in, you might accidentally be changing the mission statement of your library over time. This could like slowly push you in different directions than you thought you were going to go in, and that's not a bad thing all the time, but you want to be aware of what's happening. Yeah, so if you're going away from your current goals, it's going to take time and energy away from the other projects that you have currently. Here's some more on the funder. So knowing the average amount of funding they give out. Some funding organizations don't give out as many grants as others do, so it'll be harder to get money out of them. Or the one here at the bottom, obtaining copies of previously successful proposals. That'll let you know what style they like. You can not copy and not mimic, but you can see how other organizations pitched to them and see if you can include elements that'll be similar. Now, next up, and just one moment, I need a drink. Sorry, this room is hot and I'm wearing entirely wool. Sorry. So here, there's a bit more about researching. So we're going on to the outline next. So here's a general outline of a proposal. You've got your cover sheet, title page, executive summary, the proposal itself, budgets, appendices. Sometimes there's different arrangements. This is all going to be depending on the funder's guidelines. Occasionally, next to process, there'll actually be a timeline that you'll create, or what's called dissemination. Basically, how you plan on getting information about your project out to the general public. It all depends on what they ask for themselves. And let's see. One of the only tips about the outline is you always want to make sure that you're basically doing simple speech. This is just a general writing tip here. Very rarely do people complain that grants are too simply stated. I don't think I have ever seen one that was too simple. I've seen many that are far too complex and overwritten, or that don't give enough detail, but yes, nothing has ever been I've never seen one that was too clear. And also, when you're doing your outline, you also want to make sure that you have put the name of the project and your library's information on every page. Sometimes what people do is they'll split these things apart, and one page will travel somewhere else. And you want to make sure that everyone can figure out what the page is attached to, if things get photocopied and so forth. And then also with outlining, it's just writing down like 3 lines of the most important information and then just expanding from there. Now, we have a little quiz on writing stuff. Anyone wants to speak up? Anyone have any ideas of the worst things, the types of writing you really want to avoid in a grant? Or the things that you really want to make sure it's important elements you have? Well, one of the most important things, and this is directly from patients, be lively. You're basically selling your library. You want to make sure they know who you are. You don't want to be incredibly dry and academic. You want to give your personality to show through. you want to show that you're all people, that you care about your work. You want to show your passion for whatever the project is. It should come through. But also make sure that your tone is correct. Depending on what type of organization, they are going to want things being like a business style or less formal, more formal. You want to make sure you're matching what they're talking about. You want to make sure that you contact an actual person at the organization and direct it to them. Is someone have the microphone on? You want to say something? No? Okay. Another thing is, for things you want to avoid, acronyms. This is a big one. If you use any acronyms, remember that you have to actually spell it out first, and then you can use the acronym later on. But I've seen a few things where people just go straight in to using acronyms and libraries. Sorry, I'm not saying anything about any grants I've seen from anyone else. This is back in library school. People use library-specific terminology that it's like, well, I've actually never worked at a university library. I have no idea what you're talking about. Or I was talking to another person. I started talking about our catalog system. It's called workflows. I just started talking about workflows. They had to stop me. They had no idea what I was talking about. My entire conversation was gibberish to them until they got more information. So you want to make sure that you show this to someone outside of your organization, someone who's not related at all to libraries or the projects that you're doing, so you can find out any gaps that you've made by accident. But to go back, so worst things you want to avoid in writing. Everyone knows you shouldn't do passive voice. You need to be active. You're taking control of things. This is you requesting money and funds for a project. There's no need to apologize for needing money. Grant funders have seen grants before. They know everyone needs some extra help along the way. You also want to make sure that you're not self-centered, though. You want to make sure that you have written your proposal about like the community or the reason you need the funds. This is all people-centered. You want to show that it's not just that your library wants to do a project. It's that you are trying to promote a service, or that this was going to impact your community in such and such ways. You want to add the human element back in. Not going too overblown. Too much emotion will just push them back out again. There's only so much about, like crying children we can see before people just get desensitized. So show that it's going to affect people, but don't try to overwrite all of the emotion. Also, make sure you're specific, no vagaries. And also, there's a word called obfuscating. So don't bury what you're asking for in flowery speech. You want it to be plain spoken so they can just easily read it and get through. If it's too overwritten, they're not going to finish reading it. Oh, and another one is, we were talking about all the research you're supposed to be doing. Make sure you're planning ahead. Grants written at the last moment are not good grants. Mostly because we have to do a lot of editing. So you want to make sure you're going through the process multiple times with different people in case there's other stylistic issues involved. So first up, executive summary. Now I have here, this is the purpose of the summary and overview of your proposal. An important thing about this is, I have it the last line, read first, written last. Some people write a brief idea of what their summary is so they can make sure they stay on track during the proposal writing, but this really should be written last because you have to sum up every single thing that you've said in your proposal in this couple of paragraphs or this one page. It's short. So if you do this well, if you do the executive summary well, this should be, you're simplifying all of their jobs. Everyone who's reading your review, they can easily find something that will remind them what it is that you are asking for when they bring this up in other meetings. In some cases, this actually might be the only thing some people read. If they're busy or if they're in a large meeting of other people and they have so many other reviews to get through. If the summary is written poorly, you're going to make everyone's jobs harder, and they're not going to be favorable towards your proposal. No one's going to keep reading something that's confusing, basically. So this is also something that people are going to be referring back to when they're talking about your proposal. So you want to make sure that you spend some time on this. Okay, so next, introductory statement. A lot of information is going to be in your introductory statement. You see here it sets the tone for the entire proposal. This is, again, where you're going to bring up your credentials. You're selling yourself. Basically, you're telling them this is why you're the best person to handle whatever the project is that you're proposing and why they should fund you. Funders aren't going to give their money to people they don't find trustworthy or they don't think are going to be able to handle the money well or the project. So you're selling yourself, basically. You're saying why it's you that they should fund and how you're capable of handling it. This is also one of the parts where, since you've done your research on all of the funders, this is where you link together your mission and their mission. So you are going to be using the introductory statement to point out how whatever the project is that you're doing lines up with their priorities, why they are the best organization to fund this project that you are proposing. Again, this is when we were talking about the self-centeredness. Sometimes when people are just starting out writing grants, they're just talking about their own organization. But this is, you're supposed to entice, basically, the funder. You need to point out why they want to fund you, why they're the best person for this. There's a couple different types of introductory statements. The basic one's just a summary. This is the basic information of the proposal. Here's the facts. Who's going to be doing the project, where the project is, what the project is, why you're doing the project. Another type is a philosophy statement, convincing sponsors that you and they think alike, all of philosophical reasons behind the project. There's a historical statement which shows that your library has done this type of thing before and that their organization has funded this type of thing before, and that's why you two should meet together, and then you have all this special ability to solve the project that you're doing. And then one that's used less often is crisis. This is a very important project that must be solved immediately. That one's not used quite so often, mostly because, as we said earlier, grants aren't really for immediate, time-sensitive issues, mostly because if it's really that immediate and time-sensitive, you don't have a year to wait to see if you can get the funding. Okay, so next up we have the statement of need. This again summarizes the issue. You're going to be doing a lot of summarizing when you're writing proposals. So one thing about here is the statement of need. It represents the entire reason behind your proposal. This is the conditions you want to change or the things you want to create. So you want to have a lot of basically evidence in this. This is what the problem is, and this is why you need to fix it, or this is what we want, and this is how we're going to do it. I say here, summarize your familiarity with research. You should know what other people are doing in this area, whatever the area is. If it's bookmobiles, you need to know what everyone else is doing with bookmobiles. You need to know about what has worked and what hasn't worked. And if you can get it for your specific region, that's even better. You also want to show that whatever it is you're trying to fund is reasonable, that you understand the scope of it, and that this is something that you can handle and that it can be done within the course of however long you've given yourself for the project. This is also a moment where you have to remember that not everyone has the same, what's the word? I wouldn't say standards, but not everyone sees the problems like you're going to see the problem. So this is where you're going to convince them that the need that you have is important and why it's important. So, the libraries, we always tell people this is why reading is important. This is why these outreach services are important. Well, this is where you have to remind them of those issues. Some people aren't going to see them the same way you are. Another thing about the statement of needs, you have to also show that if you're talking about a problem, that this is a solvable problem. If you are showing too much doom and gloom, people are going to think that there's nothing you can do and that this small project isn't going to help. So you want to show if it's an issue, that it's an issue, it's an important issue, but it's a solvable issue, and they can solve it by funding your project. This is also where you're going to point out how whatever the goal or the grant or the project, how it relates to your organization's goals, why you're the best place to do this project. And it also, you link together basically this project and the larger issues that you're facing. So, we want to fund a bookmobile because literacy rates in the region are down to whatever the % that they are, that type of thing. Justifying why you have chosen this problem, that's, So we have the objectives. So here, this is pretty common sense. You're basically going to point out, this is what you're going to do. This is how you consider yourself successful. We have some acronyms. Depending on what books you're reading, there's like 8 different types of acronyms. This is the one I like the best. This is from Proposal, Planning, and Grant Writing. It's from 1998, but it does have some things that are nice and concise. So we have simple. This is when you are going to talk about what you are going to change through your project, what's going to be different, what you're going to do, specific information about how you're going to accomplish things. Immediate is for what the time frame is. You're basically going to show why you need this proposal funded now, why it can't wait until later, how long it's going to take to achieve everything that you're asking for. Measurable is going to be to show that you can actually tell that your project's working. What you're going to consider successful, that type of. So practical is, that one actually is pretty self-explanatory, that whatever you're proposing is an actual solution to an actual problem, that you're not just making things up for things that aren't issues. Logical is that you have step-by-step ways of accomplishing your project. That's not just, step 1, create proposals, step 3, fund things, step 4, profit. And evaluable is that you're pointing out how much change has to occur for you to consider yourself to be effective. What your criteria for success is, what impact you're going to make, that's an important one. The value that you have. This is also where you're going to point out how long it's going to, not exactly how long it's going to take, but if your project has an end point, if this is going to be something that has to get funded again in the future, and if you think you're going to be able to find funding from other places, why the outcome of your project is important to that funder. And this is another place where your writing style is important because it has to be able, you have to be able to read this well. Clear, concise, and logical. And then actually, back at the top, I have something that says, don't gild the lily. As we know, lilies are pretty, and we don't need to cover them in gold. So it's overwriting, basically. If you have a proposal for something and you think that perhaps the funder's not going to think it's really that important, one, why are you doing a proposal? But the second one is, funders have seen grants before. They have funded projects, many, many projects, so they know exactly what the scope is about certain things. So if you're overwriting something, if you're making a project seem much bigger than it actually is, they can tell. And it's just going to ignore them. Annoy them. If you are making your project seem more important than it is or bigger than it actually is, they're going to start questioning where else you've inflated issues. So, you know, have you inflated your budget, or it basically puts your not having a good word day. Not credulity. Your credentials. It basically puts your credentials on the line. So you want to make sure that you're stating the project, you're stating exactly what the project is. You want to have your emotional bits, but not making it seem that, you know, this project is going to solve all the problems in the community at once with a magic arrow. Just tell them what the project is. So next up, process. Process is pretty simple if you've done your research on your proposal, exactly what this is, how you're going to do what it is that you said you were going to do. You want to tell them what the risks are. There's always risks in any project, even if the risk is just the project doesn't get done. You want to tell them how you're going to handle any risks that might happen. What will happen if it looks like your project's not going to get done? So this is where you say all the precise steps that you're going to do to take care of your proposal. This is also a place that sometimes people use charts, timelines, little task charts, pointing out who's going to do what and where, who is going to do each task, when the task's going to get done if your grant is funded, and then if things start going wrong, who is going to be responsible for fixing them. And then next we have evaluation. A lot of times proposal writers don't actually explain how they're going to evaluate their process. Everything needs to be evaluated. So you can do this in-house, or you can actually bring in consultants. You have to specify, you know, how you're going to do it. Whichever way you do, you want to say why you've chosen whoever you've chosen to evaluate, why you've chosen them, what their credentials are. Even if it is just that they've evaluated projects before, you want to point out that you've thought this through. Another thing is you want to point out why it's needed. Everyone knows these are needed, but you're selling the project. You're going to point out why this is a project important enough to be evaluated about it afterwards. So there's also different types of evaluation. So what you're going to point out is what type of evaluation you have, why that type is appropriate to the project that you're going to do, and all the steps you're going to take to make sure the evaluation is done. And I have a couple different types of evaluation here. This first one is called formative. This one is basically, as the project is going on, you are going to be continually making sure that the project is on track, and if anything starts changing, you're going to immediately modify, basically, the project to make sure that you're staying on course. So this is it's a continual evaluation that happens the minute you start the project. So you're going to make sure that any changes that are needed to make sure the project is successful, and you are constantly making sure that you are still on track. Next one, Summative, this is the very black and white type of evaluation. Is your project successful? That's all that summative actually is. Did you accomplish what your grant was for? You can occasionally go into how well it worked, but basically summative is just, did your project work? Yes or no? Why not? Impact, this is one that's pretty popular nowadays. People, again, we talk about the human element. Everyone wants to see who's affected by their grants and their proposals and their projects. This is all people-based, outcome-based. It's not just if the project was successful, it's was the project successful and who was the impact? Who was affected by the proposal, by the grant, by the project that you had? What lives were changed? Can you actually point out in your community that there were changes? Can you point out that, little Timmy can read now? That's a very bad example, I'm sorry. I'm not good with coming up with things right the minute. So how lives were changed, how people were affected, what the actual impact was on your community. And then at the bottom it says there, information about what the direction of the project should take in the future. If it impacted so many people, how are we going to continue the change? How are we going to continue making yourself useful? Okay, and then after evaluation, we have budget. Very important thing. Another credibility statement. This is where you're going to point out that, well, one, you know how to do math, that you guys know how to make a budget, that you have made a realistic budget that isn't overblown but also hasn't forgotten very important issues. If you're going to need extra file folders, well, you have to tell them that you need extra file folders. If you're taking people's jobs into account, if you have extra people who are going to be paid to do your project, or if certain employers are going to do part-time, salaries, travel, supplies, extra materials, all legitimate budget items. That you remember to do fringe benefits when you're doing anything about salaries, that, there's insurance and all of that. Again, each funder is going to have different guidelines about what they want to see. I have at the bottom that it's fine to create projections. While you can create projections, they actually have to be based on actual costs, and you have to show where you got the cost from. So if you're projecting that you're going to need 15 notebooks, actually I just realized you could say notebooks. Anyway, if you need 15 notebooks, you're going to point out where you found the cost of the notebook, or if the project's next year, this is how much you think it's going to go up, or like that. This is basically justifying why you're asking for the amount of money that you're asking. Here's some terminology for budget. Sometimes people get confused about this. So, you have your direct cost, which is, again, to go for the bookmobile. This is how much the bookmobile costs, and the fuel, and the tires, and the snow chains, and the books inside. Indirect costs are, maybe you have a warehouse that you have to heat higher to keep the, I'm sorry, my metaphor is getting worse as I go on, but yeah, see, heating costs, or things that you didn't think would actually, things that are indirectly causing you to spend money on them. Cost sharing is what you are going to put in. So this is also your time is something that you're sharing the cost of if you're doing this during your current work day. So you're taking time away from your current work to go into it, that goes in there. This is also where you're going to show about whether or not you have flexibility in the budget, unexpected costs. To go back to the bookmobile, what if you have a record amount of snow and you have to buy more snow tires? Sorry, that's, again, I should stop trying to come up with things. You also want to make sure that you are relating your budget items back to the project. So if you have a couple different things in your budget, you want to point out this is why you're asking for it. This is what part of the, this is why you need it for this project. You need the notebooks because you're handing them out to children for classes. Sorry, I should stop doing that. Right, so sometimes there's budget narratives where you're actually going to write in text about this is what all the costs are, this is why we need the costs. Also show how you calculated the costs. That's an important one. And again, like I said, just make sure that you have read what the funder's guidelines are and that you are putting things in a way that they had asked for. So, conclusion. There's a thing about essays, you know. Introduction is, this is what I'm going to say. The main body is, here is me saying what I am saying. And the conclusion is basically you telling them what you've said. This is your last chance to put any spin on what it is you're asking, your last appeal, basically. Like it says, what you're accomplishing, why it's important, who's benefiting, and why it should be funded. This is going to be one of the last things they read, so you want to make sure that they take away your message, what it is that you're talking about. Okay, and then after the conclusion, we have our references. Like I said, resumes, definitions, if you have things that might not be entirely clear. We did talk earlier that you should avoid things that aren't clear, but if you have to put them in, definitions go here. Letters of support from your community, that's always important. The more you can get of those, the better. Again, financial documentation. And then sometimes, if they have a strict page limit, you can kind of keep your main document under whatever the limit is by putting in all your graphs here or your charts, saying, you know, in the main body you'll say, you know, see Appendix A, and you can have your 3-page chart. Again, you have to be careful with that because funders have seen grants before, so they'll know if you're actually hiding most of it in there. This is within reason. If it's just 1 or 2 or 3 or 6. This is also where you're going to put in your IRS determination letters. Any other supporting materials you have. You know, you want to make sure that everything you put in the references and the appendices are important to the project, though, and don't just include extra charts because you think that they're interesting and pretty. So one of the things about the grants in general, this is just about the entire grant writing process. The entire point of it is that you're trying to, well, want to get your project funded. Everyone, we know that. But you're trying to turn the reviewer into basically an advocate for what it is you're trying to do. So this is what you're supposed to be writing towards, is you're trying to get them excited for your project, get them interested in what you're doing. Show them why it's important, and then get them basically on your side enough that they're going to start advocating your project themselves. Once you keep that in mind, the point of this grant is to get them on your side, get them interested in the project. A lot of the other grant writing becomes easier. It makes the decisions easier to do about, you know, should I include X or should I include Y? It's like, well, which one of them is going to be more interesting to this funder? Which one of them is going to actually get them on your side? Okay, so we have, after this is all written, submitting, double, triple check, get someone else to read the grant funder's guidelines and make sure that you haven't accidentally missed something. I won't tell you the number of times that I've read instructions for something and completely misinterpreted something. Some of them have specific application forms. Sometimes you're going to want to make sure that you've actually called the funder first and they know you, and then you send it in. This is basically the packaging of the proposal. Different styles for different people. Double check you have everything correct. Spell check everything. Read it backwards if you have to, but this is another time about your credentials. If you have misspellings in your grant, they're not going to look, it's not going to look good for you. And then at the bottom I have a thing here about do you have their name right and do you have their gender right? I have an oddly spelled name, and when I see things addressed to me that are misspelled, it doesn't, I'm not going to read anything positively if they haven't even bothered to make sure that they put the A and the E in the right place. It tells me that whoever has written this letter to me hasn't really paid attention. But on the other hand, because it is hard to spell, when someone does get everything correct, I'm like, hey, they actually spent the time to make sure that they paid attention to the massive amount of vowels I have in my name. Gender neutral names, you want to make sure you actually get the gender right. It's offensive if you call a Mr. a Miss or a Mrs. a Mr. In certain cases, if everyone's getting it wrong, the fact that you've gotten it right might make them more favorable to you to start with. But again, if you've contacted them ahead of time or talked about any of the other people that have gotten their projects funded through this funding, you should know this. So, follow-up. One thing about grants is this is all relationship building. This is you forming a relationship with other organizations that have done similar projects. You can all share information, give tips and tricks, maybe share all of your information, or figure out a way between all of you to do things better in the future. But you're also talking to the funders. You want to make sure that you are creating relationships with them. This isn't just you asking them for money, it's you connecting together. You want to always make sure that you keep them in the loop. It doesn't even if it's something small change in your proposal, you want to make sure that they have the latest information for it. And the relationship building, if it is a relationship, if you do get funded, again, relationship building. You don't take their money and run. But basically that means is you don't want to just take the funding and never talk to them again, because you are forming a relationship. You don't just ignore them once they've funded you. You want to make sure you send them a thank you letter. You want to keep them informed of the project as it's progressing. If you have any publications that you're creating, you want to make sure that it has, this project was funded by so-and-so. You want to send them all of that material so they can actually see what's happening from the money that they gave you. Basically, if you only talk to the funder when they are giving you money, you're decreasing the likelihood that they're going to continue giving you money in the future. It sets a bad precedent. If you aren't funded, it's still a relationship. There's still a chance that they will fund you in the future. Maybe something didn't go well with this one. Nowadays, in this economic times, people sometimes just don't have the money. They might love your project. They might be completely on board to fund it in a year or two, but just they don't have the money right now. It's never personal. Well, I'm sure sometimes it is, but mostly it's not going to be personal. What you can do is you can ask about future funding if it's just the wrong time for this project. Maybe they've already funded 6 other projects similar. If you can distance yourself enough from the project, you should ask why you weren't funded. You want to be very gentle about that. Don't be aggressive or accusatory. Just ask, if there was a reason, a solvable reason why this project wasn't funded. What you can do then is go back and change things so that you can figure out, make your adjustments as needed, and then maybe resubmit to them, or if they have another place that maybe would be better for this project. Maybe that this one wasn't exactly in line, but they have someone else they know that's perfect for this. So when you're going to seek your other prospects, and then again, try again later. An important thing about this one, I said earlier that it's not personal. This is where you don't act badly. Funders talk to each other. If you do something like magnificently bad, everyone's going to start talking about it because they're going to be so astonished that someone actually did that. They're going to just have to call someone else up and talk about, can you believe what this person did to me? And then when you submit to that person, they're going to know about you ahead of time. So everyone talks to each other. Okay, so for finding funding, this is with the links that we're talking about. We have government sources, non-government. For the government sources, federal business opportunities, this is a single point of entry for procurement opportunities for the government. So, Federal Register is basically a daily publication produced by the federal government. This is where you're going to find the first information about any possible funding that they're going to do. This is where they're going to talk about it before it goes into the other federal databases. In Foundation Directory, there's some information that's free on there, but I think their main area is actually subscription-based. Okay, and then we also have some print resources, and these, if you don't have your library, you can always interlibrary loan them. They're located in a couple different libraries throughout Alaska, so they're available everywhere. Chronicle of Philanthropy is actually a periodical, so you can find the most recent issues. They have a good website, too. Annual Register is monthly. The guide is annual, so towards the end of the year, the information might not be quite so accurate. You want to double check any information you get from them, but they are really comprehensive. And then, if you have any questions, now is the time for them. I've put down the website link again for those of you that haven't written it down yet. lam.alaska.gov/grants. This one is also, we're making it on our side. I made it a few weeks ago. If you guys have anything that you think would be good to add to this page, just let us know. There's a little contact form on the website. And we're open to anything that you guys think is interesting. Oh, there we go. So, you guys have any questions for me?
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming. And again, if you have any really in detail questions, Patience Fredrickson at the Anchorage Library, she is wonderful.